eliminated our eligibility to be in the expanded historic district. The judge in that case made the point when he found for the neighbors that the towns in New Jersey have a right to a master plan and to decide how they want to develop and what they want their community to be. And when the opposition pointed out that, well, look at Franklin Place, there's tall, big brick apartment buildings all around. There's non-conforming uses up and down the street. And the judge asked if there was any place where that wasn't the case. And they couldn't come up with a single example. He asked if they had decided to have a historic district expansion, and the town admitted yes. Then he referred to the developer and found as could he build his project in other places, and were there zones in town where that project was possible, and the developer admitted yes. So the judge said it was not his job to decide whether the project was good or bad. His job was to decide whether the town had a right to have a master plan that determined that they wanted that area to be reduced in density and to preserve its historic district status. The neighbors were rather proud because we felt like we got our money for our investment, but then our tax dollars had to pay for the other four attorneys that were against us. I do not oppose development on this site. I oppose the refusal to consider the tremendous potential here where with a little more effort the developer's needs could be met and the goals and objectives of the ordinance that this council enacted into law in November 2018, not that long ago. The number one goal of that master plan was healthy residential neighborhoods. Objective 1, preserve the physical character and fabric of existing neighborhoods. This means this council has an obligation to include not just the Spring Hill Assisted Living Center, but the neighborhoods that surround this project on all sides. Objective 2, promote healthy, complete neighborhoods where residents have safe and convenient access to goods, services, and institutions they require every day. In this case, sitting in the front window of George and Martha's restaurant, you have a bird's eye view of that entire intersection, and I was amazed to discover that there were hundreds of people that walked through that neighborhood each within an hour. That's all I spent, but I counted well over 100 people on bicycles, on strollers, people coming up from Spring Street, people heading to the train station, back and forth. It was a bustling pedestrian area for people who lived in the area who obviously walked and did not take their cars. Objective 3, balance the provision of inherently beneficial uses with the need to protect residential neighborhoods from a significant and unreasonable impact. Any added traffic will have a significant impact here. The fourth objective.
One second, Marge, how many objectives do you have?
Okay, I only have one more sentence. The fourth objective is to continue to maintain a range of housing choices that are low, middle, or moderate income for the families that live in that neighborhood. Contributing dollars to a fund to move the poorer residents to smaller units elsewhere in town doesn't meet that objective as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll say a couple of things about the master plan. The provisions that were stated here, and I think a broader conversation about master plan consistency is properly had at the planning board. I'm happy to have it there, but I don't want to make people come out with multiple things, so I'll just respond quickly here. These discussions and the provisions in the master plan, the ones that were talked about, really derived from, at that time, and this is not an issue anymore, but these were being informed by controversy around the tax code and things like that, where there was an inherently beneficial use intruding into in certain people's minds, intruding into a residential neighborhood, and that there were residents coming out actively as part of that master plan process saying, our future master plan needs to protect us, we need to protect residential neighborhoods, we need to, and that's why it says inherently beneficial uses and the traffic that they create. It's not traffic generally speaking, there was a whole chapter on traffic. That was part of the land use section that spoke about residential neighborhoods. And if you go and build something like that on a residential street, it has impacts that otherwise single-family residences wouldn't create for each other. So that's what the context was of those master plan provisions that were being read. In terms of housing choices and housing options, we don't go around tooting our own horn, but this council, this administration has built more affordable housing in the last 10 years than all the other administrations in this town combined. Literally. Maybe since the public housing was built in this town, but in the last 20, 30 years, there's been an incredible amount of affordable housing built in this town because the rising tide has lifted all ships. This project is anticipated to provide $750,000 into the town's affordable housing trust fund. Not because they're doing off-site affordable housing or they're doing housing on this project. The reason they're doing a financial contribution is because there's no housing as part of this project, so there's no housing for people to be housed in on-site. So the way the state law is set up is that you do 2.5% of the equalized assessed value for commercial development. They're going to be consistent with that. That money will create, what did we say, like 20-some, using the subsidies that we've used in the past at $50,000 a unit, it's something like 20 additional dwelling units that we could try to create. Even if it's half that, it's still 10 at 100,000 a unit. So, I think it sounds even low, thinking about the math, but anyway, the point is, that's the reason why it's not one of these situations where we're building luxury housing here and providing off-site housing there. There's no housing being proposed here. That's why there's a financial contribution instead.
But part of the consistency review is just that, it's a review against the master plan.
Yes.
And
a holistic methodology.
we have a lot of good advice being given to us, but I do want to point out that it doesn't stop here. It does go on to the planning board, and it's okay to come out and speak to the planning board. Because again, when you talk about the protection of neighborhoods, which Marge is bringing up, the concern will be to what degree is traffic redirected or diverted into those neighborhoods. And there's been a lot of discussion, and there's been a lot of discussion on the protection of the neighborhoods at Pine and King, which has several people, very mixed incomes in different backgrounds. There's also the ongoing concern, diversion of traffic in Franklin Corner. So it's important to look at that at the planning board. The second piece that was being brought up was availability of services. I will tell you what this application did bring up, and we are all talking about it now, is the concept of affordable retail. And actually, it was introduced to me by Linda Smato. Linda Smato actually pointed out, she teaches this stuff at Rutgers and whatever, that whole concept of affordable retail and affordability. And I give a lot of credit to Council President Foster because she actually was very instrumental in getting the right language into this plan.
Well, the help of council.
Okay, I'll get to the okay, but that language did make it into the plan, so it is going to be a consideration. And on the last plan, I just have to bring up one other point that maybe got lost in the very beginning of the meeting. The 2008 plan does not work. Okay? It is a plan that's not relevant today, and it's a plan that if somebody came in here and as a matter of right wanted it built, we would not like, we don't want to see it. That's one plan. Well, you did have an increased interest. You don't have to prove it, Phil. I'm not proving it. But that plan does not work, and we cannot, and that is actually more dense. And what we're hoping is that the retail, and I'm here mumbling with Mike, who knows this better than I do, is that we're going to see the retail establishments. It's 34,000 square feet of retail. So you're going to have more retail, more people walking. It may not be the traffic. You stop and go, hop in, get your buck meal, hop in, get your pizza, get your bottle of wine. It's going to be more of that. It's going to be more the, people are going to have to walk promenade, park, spend more time. It is going to be different, and hopefully different and better.
I know a lot of you. My name is Andrea Lekberg, and I have a business on 16th of
I'm sorry, can you please repeat your?
Yeah, Andrea Lekberg. My address is 51 Mount Kimball. And then I have a business at 16 Katana. So I support the project. I like the thought of more people being in town during the day who are parked. I think it would help all the small businesses in town. My business is probably half local and half business community, and so I really support both of them. So I hope this project goes through, and that's it.
And you might have mentioned what your business is?
It's a bakery.
Call it.
Called
The
what?
Artist Baker. We got voted the best bakery in New Jersey.
I was put on the spot because that birthday cake I still talk about.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Now I'm really hungry. Thanks a lot. I'm Rebecca Feldman, 19 Olmsted Road. And I'm a newcomer compared to Marge. I've lived in Margetown only 21 years. And I was on the planning board 16 years ago when this area was designated in redevelopment. And I was on the council in 2008 when I watched my peers vote for a redevelopment plan that, if it were done now, would be terrible. And I understand you've inherited some of those obligations. In the 11 years since then, we've done a lot of really good projects, and I think everything that we've learned and that we've grown as a community to expect is reflected almost entirely in this plan. So I'm really excited. I think Margetown really got screwed when 287 went through and an extended ramp was formed with Lafayette and Morris and cut our town basically in half and left us with auto-dominant uses like strip malls with front yard parking that don't belong, frankly, in our downtown. So it's great to see a lot of those things finally going away and instead getting a vibrant streetscape where I'm going to want to be. I do have to say, though, and I like the way you're attempting to handle this, but that the council and your ability to communicate with the public will need to be vigilant when this goes to the planning board. And in this project and in all other ones, we have to think about what brought this company to want to be here, which is that the town is walkable. And in every chance where we have an opportunity to decide, do we want to get cars through faster at 6 p.m., or do we want the blind woman with the seeing eye dog to be able to cross the street on the way to the bank and the doctor appointment in the middle of the day? I want us to pick the woman walking the seeing eye dog, who you met last night at the council meeting, who I met on Madison Avenue on my way back from a doctor's appointment, who knew at every corner in Morristown where it's safe to cross and where it's not, where the signals work, where they don't work, where there's not adequate provisions. So as this goes forward, we need to keep being vigilant and put the priority on the people who are walking because they are defenseless. I don't care how slow the car is going when it hits someone, I don't want it to hit someone. And if cars have to stop and there's a signal to let people cross, and if it means traffic's going to move slower through town than it does now, so be it. This town has to be walkable, and that's the top priority. It's why we're all here. So I hope this goes forward and that we'll all remain involved at the planning board level. And thank you all for listening and coming out and then reflecting it. I feel like this has really come a long way. So,
Thank you.
good
Thank
work.
you. That was my job, though. Thank the public for coming.
No, I mean, it's late.
Council President, I'd like to just read to Ms. Feldman's point, just a passage from page 25 of the plan. This plan refers the planning board to ensure the roundabout is designed properly and incorporates sufficient features to ensure the safety of pedestrians and cyclists, including vulnerable users like seniors, children, and the visually impaired. In its review of the proposed roundabout, the planning board should prioritize design alternatives that would improve functionality of the intersection for cyclists and pedestrians relative to the existing conditions. And then it goes on, and then there's some additional content that we've recently added. Additional interventions beyond the features discussed above, which is like landscape islands and buffers, shall be analyzed and evaluated. Where pedestrians' accommodations negatively affect vehicular circulation, the traffic study shall describe cost and benefit of that accommodation with regard to pedestrian mobility and vehicular mitigation. In these cases, this redevelopment plan strongly encourages the planning board to prioritize pedestrian accommodations. So I think that that is as strong as we can possibly make it, knowing what we know today.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Sure.
I know. Greenberger, I think everybody probably knows who I am at this point.
Address for the record, please.
18 Catano Avenue. Every time I look at this project again, I recognize nuances that benefit the human scale. Yeah, that's it. And that, elements that really draw together all sides of town, from whichever direction they come. There simply isn't a promenade like that anywhere. It's kind of like crossing the Morristown Green. And what I really liked about what Jon said, I think, was that the opportunity to, subsequently look at what happens as far as traffic is concerned. Should, adjustments want to be made, and adjustments will need to be made. I've driven on traffic circles all over the world, and I was pretty thankful when they got rid of the Ledgewood traffic circle. But this one, it's the closer, I look at it, I look at the, kind of the articulation where it goes from 2 lanes to 1 lane. I go, oh, I wouldn't have to think about that at all. It's engineered so that one knows what to do as one enters, turns off, and leaves. Nobody's going to run into the middle of the street and look up and say, I don't like this building. I happen to think that the initial aesthetic articulation is really good. I think adjustments will be made. I know that the architect involved is award-winning in their attention to energy efficiency and green design. The biggest thing for any building in efficiency, sustainability, operation is the envelope. The lighting doesn't hurt either. But all that's been considered here. It's just overall a knockout for this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other members of the public wishing motion to be heard at this time. One more.
Hello, Jon Lin from Midtown Wine Merchants and Macho Nacho. Just had a question about the roundabout. Mike Ellens, you talked about where it was located, right on the Spring Street side. Because the Spring Street slopes, and say in wintry weather, you're going towards the green from Moore Street. Would that be an issue at all because of the slope? You're coming from Morris to the green.
So Mars to the degree. Yeah. Just like, Brian's probably gonna be the one to answer, but I just wanna clarify, are you talking about going up the hill?
Yeah, going up the hill, because Spring Street slopes down.
Right.
So you're gonna, I don't know what the angle is of the slope, but, I mean, that could affect cars, easily slip. Someone walking across the crosswalk, rainy weather or winter or snow, they're gonna slip and fall. Another thing you said was, by 2022, that roundabout's gonna be 85% at max, right? By year 2023, 2024, 2025, what's that gonna be at? How long until you hit 100%? If it's at 2026, then, I don't know, you gotta work on something else right now. And, another thing is you guys talked about the amount of retail going in is okay because the retail going in is equal to the retail going out, But we've been there for, so many stores have been there for 30+ years, and we're kind of stuck. This is the first time I'm hearing, I think Phil, you said, they're working on something for the existing tenants? Was that you or someone else?
Mm-hmm.
Someone said that, right? So this is the first time I'm hearing of it. And, I think you said some tenants, if they found a new space, they want to move out, they don't know what to do. And like the existing ones, like we really can't if we find a new space. We're stuck because we have a lease until the end of 2020. So even if we find a new space now, we're still stuck. We have to pay rent. We're paying double rent then for a new space and our existing space. So, if you guys should take that into consideration, to help out the existing tenants. And like I know you talk about Deloitte, they're moving in. They spend a lot of money in charity and donations, but us small guys, like we donate charity groups, we host charity events ourselves, so we donate back. So, don't forget that. Don't forget the small guys, because 1,000 small guys could equal one big guy, right? That's like it. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
So, actually, if you could come back, I'm sorry, I want to ask you some questions, if you don't mind. And I know that we're not testimony, we're under oath here, but so are you saying that you haven't been approached and you haven't had any discussions about relocation with your landlord?
Me personally, no.
No, not you personally. Anybody representing your entity?
Anybody representing, I think they talked to, my father is one of the owners of Midtown Wine Merchants.
Okay.
And I know they talked to him,
Okay.
but.
What was that conversation?
No one's talked to me about it.
So nobody's talked to you as the owner of Macho Nacho?
No.
Phil, I think the question he's asking is, right now, they probably have redevelopment clauses in the lease. We can't give this advice, but I think what the concern is, right now, they probably have redevelopment clauses in their leases. Leases say within X period of time, we can ask you to exit the premises. The reciprocal's not there, that as they're planning their relocation, will the landlord give them consideration to release them from their current leases that are occurring until 2020.
Right.
So that they can have money to put a down payment on a new unit and be able to afford the rent. Because again, you know, these are food and the margins are probably a low margin business.
So, the thing I would just say to that briefly, again, I know it's late, is that I think it might make sense to let this, if the council goes ahead and, you know, determines to introduce, and this process plays out, I think more certainty will be had all around the table. And I think that the current property owner will be in a better position to modify leases. I don't know that, I haven't had that conversation, I'm not speaking for anybody right now, but I'm just thinking about kind of the conundrum that a lot of people are in with this property being up in the air at the moment. So that's, and in between now and the next time we're together on this, we will have those conversations with the property owner, the current landlord, to see what we can accomplish. So thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure, because I'm just surprised, because we have had conversations with the developers, attorneys, and it would have been very surprising if nobody has had those conversations, because we've been told otherwise. So that's what I wanted to know. That's all. And then the other question was, people slip on the crosswalk?
Yeah, it was about the slope of Spring Street. I don't know how much it slopes at that point, but
The cross slope, like going, so like the crosswalk is not flat, you're saying?
yeah, it'll be pitched. Same thing with the roundabout at that section. So if it's raining or snowing, and there's like a little bit of ice on the floor, the car's going around, and then it's totally, I don't know, it could just slide. That's just what I see.
Is it gonna be graded and flat?
Was that Brian answer?
So the design, the grading, and those aspects will be, when we get the full engineering. So when they provide a full engineered set of plans looking at the vertical or horizontal layouts, we'll review that, make sure it's done in terms of sound traffic principles and the recommended.
And there are standards, there would be standards that you need to comply with.
Yeah, and specifically either standards for ADA compliancy in terms of crosswalks, making sure they're at the right grades, right cross slopes and that sort of thing, and that will all be looked at and reviewed when we get to that level of detail and engineering.
Okay.
All right, was that the last comment from public? I see another hand go back. Go up.
Good evening, council. My name is Oliver Starnes. I live on Pine Street, number 35, about 100 feet from the project site. And I just want to make a couple comments after having attended the August 13th meeting. I appreciate the consideration given to the vulnerable pedestrians in town, being that, you know, we see seeing eye dogs and blind pedestrians practicing walking the roadways on a daily basis. I also appreciate the kind of tree-lined street front in front of the structure being called a promenade instead of a green line, as it was labeled mistakenly, incorrectly at the August 13th meeting. Greenway, of course, is abutting the undeveloped land, and we know that there's very little of that here. So, thank you. I was curious to ask if there's any public information on the 2004 redevelopment plan that, because I'm curious how or what kind of led to this design. It's just extremely unique. I understand the roundabouts are popular mechanisms, but that's basically it. I'm just curious to see what kind of, how did we get to this point? And I wanted to ask you, on the walkway in front of the structure, if bicycles or skateboards, if those kinds of things would be allowed. Because in the rendering, I see people walking, you know, you talk about 3x3, but when we think about sharing that with, you know, bicyclists and skateboarders, what have you. I wanted to ask, kind of how that would work.
Morristown.